around the equinox. So we're going to set them straight as we prepare for the start of spring. It's happening tonight if you're in the Eastern time zone, just half an hour after midnight, which means in the first half an hour of March 20th. That's strange by itself because if you're over a certain age, which I'm going to have to admit to myself, you'll remember that equinoxes are traditionally March 21st. But there has not been a March 21st equinox in a whole bunch of years now. But what's really strange is that it's now slipped to just barely the 20th. As I say, it's just the first half hour of the 20th. And in any other time zone of the United States or Canada, as you go west, that is to the central zone or the Rocky Mountain zone or the Pacific time, it's occurring before midnight, which means on the 19th. Can you recall a equinox on the 19th? So if you're tired of winter, and I don't know why you should be because it was a pretty darn mild winter, but nonetheless, let's say you're ready for spring. Well, good news, you're going to have the earliest spring of your life. Unless you're more than, well, let me see, 1896, and this is 2016. So you're talking about 120 years old. You have to be 120 years old or older to have been alive for a equinox that's this early or earlier. So very special. And it's happening for a weird reason, too. So we're going to get into all these kind of things soon. Meantime, let's just gaze just for a couple of minutes at this live view of the sun from Prescott Observatory and look at the stuff that's happening. I mean, imagine this ball that weighs the same as 300,000 planet Earths, a ball that gives off so much energy that it actually converts 4 million tons of itself into energy every second, according to Einstein. And that was almost exactly a century ago also. Einstein figured out that mass and energy are equivalent and what makes the sun shine. It was Arthur Eddington, actually, in 1920 who really solved it. But Einstein had the basic idea down by saying that mass is changing into energy. And how much mass? 4 million tons per second. And that's not some abstraction, just some idea that you might learn in school. It means if you had a giant scale and weighed the sun actually weighs 4 million tons less every second than it did the second earlier. And all of that weight is being translated into all that great energy that we love so much. We could express it in ergs as 4 times 10 to the 33 ergs, 33 zeros, or we could say that every square meter of Earth's surface, about the size of, let's say, a sheet that you might spread on the ground, gets about 1,300 watts, same as about maybe 17 light bulbs worth of power. A lot of different ways to express it. The point is, why do we even have to impress you with it? We all know the sun is bright and supplies us with our lives and started life going on Earth. And so the occasion when the entire world sees the sun at roughly the same time is a worthy occasion. And by the same time, what we're talking about is that famous line that days and nights are equal at the equinox. So happens it's not true. Anywhere, days and nights are not equal today. In fact, if you look at your local newspaper, you'll see that the time of sunrise and the time of sunset do not match. There's somewhere between 5 and 12 minutes more of light than dark. But it almost matches, enough so that we can kind of roughly say that days and nights are equal everywhere on the equinox. They would be equal if we did not have an atmosphere. It's the air that bends the sun's image upward and gives us this extra happy kind of undeserved sunshine. So all of that was views taken from live from Prescott Observatory. Now we are looking at something that, well, I'm trying to figure it out just as you are. It's a time lapse image of our planet Earth as we see clouds passing um, in fast motion. The main point is that neither pole is tipped toward the sun as we approach the equinox, and that's going to happen in just a few hours from now. So that neither people who live in the northern countries, let's say Japan or Russia or Europe or Canada, nor people in our friends in Australia and New Zealand or in South Africa in the southern hemisphere, nor are they tipped toward the sun. So it's equal. The poles are aligned sideways to the sun. And the moment that happens, that'll be half an hour after midnight Eastern Time tonight, marking the equinox, marking the start of the equinox. So to celebrate that, we're going to do some very cool stuff. Among them is, and if you see me looking to the side, it's because we've changed the format just a little bit as we look back at our live view because Paul Cox, who, oh man, I love this man. He knows everything when it comes to making this work. You know, it's been 11 years, 12 years since Slooh started this giant experiment of being able to bring the universe to anybody's computer at home, any member, any subscriber, and it's gotten to the point now where it's free or close to free. Check in to becoming a member, and you can actually control Slooh's giant telescopes. I mean, big telescopes, half meter, as they watch Jupiter spinning on its axis and its moons going around it and Saturn's rings within rings and beautiful galaxies. There are some galaxies where the uh, cores are campfire orange, where the old stars are, and where the spiral arms look like robin's eggs. They're blue and just beautiful cobalt blue colors. And we show you the true colors. They're not just black and white images, and we don't enhance them up and tweak them and make them garish just so that you feel like you're getting your money's worth with pretty colors. Now, they're true colors, they're gorgeous, and that's what Slooh does. So, this is a relatively recent thing, partnering with uh, the old Farmer's Almanac. So Slooh, again, being 11 years old, using the latest technology. This is proprietary, patented technology. No one's even allowed to use it. And yet we're partnering with the longest running. I mean, we're talking about, beginning back with Benjamin Franklin and stuff. Um, the old Farmer's Almanac, which naturally, being an almanac, concerns itself intimately with things in the sky. And the sun and the things like the equinoxes are very much part of it. So hopefully, we're going to get Paul on the show. As I say, this is coming from a lot of different places at once, different continents at once. We're looking at the sun live right now as we are seeing it from Prescott Observatory. And it's a time when the sun is moderately active. We're in the middle of solar cycle number 24, a cycle that is certainly more robust than the times between solar maxima. On the other hand, this has been the wimpiest, quietest solar maximum that we've had in a long, long time. Could be even in our lifetimes, and this is having some effects on Earth. Many astronomers think that this is mitigating global warming and making the planet different from the way it would be if the sun were not acting so strangely. So back to the sun again. The sun keeps figuring in on all of this. Again, when you see me looking off to the side here, it's because um, I'm looking at the right moment to bring in, and why not do it now? Bring in Marianne Jarvella. I've been working with her for 20 years or so. It's hard to believe that we've been at this for so long. I guess I should mention that in addition to being Slooh's astronomer here, I'm also the astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. So I'm wearing two hats and very much intimately connected with and very proud of both of those organizations and media organizations. But enough about that. Uh, Marianne, hi. How are you today?
Hi, Bob. How are you?
I'm good, and you're out in, I believe, in
Dublin?
New Hampshire, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And
And
so,
the sun is shining here.
and you are the gardening editor at the Old Farmer's Almanac. I'm the astronomy editor. You're the gardening editor. The sun, of course, figures into both of these things because we don't have plans without the sun, do we?
No, we don't. And right
Uh,
now, the nature is coming to life. So we have the crocuses blooming, like you can see here. And we have trees budding, and nature is coming alive. And we also have birds chirping. I don't know if you've heard the birds lately, but they are waking up too and making a racket. And
Now, are you finding
daylight,
this is happening earlier than
daylight,
usual
yeah,
because of this odd winter we've had?
yeah, it's day length that causes them to start singing in the morning. So with the longer days, uh, their hormones are triggered and they start singing. And they usually sing early in the morning when everything is quiet. So if you haven't had a chance, get up early in the morning when the sun rises and you can hear all the birds.
So what we're saying then is that it's not this odd um, winter, probably influenced by El Nino this year, that's causing these flowers to be blooming now and the birds to be singing now. You're saying that everything is as it should be and all of it is happening on a normal schedule? Is that what I'm getting from you?
Uh, yes, but I think the weather has a little bit to do with the earlier spring that we are seeing. So, but the day length has a big part of this, and and we can see the earthworms emerging, and actually the full moon in a couple of days is traditionally called the full worm moon. The Native Americans used to keep track of the moons so they could tell when the seasons change. So they named the moons, and it's also called the sap moon because the maple sap is flowing right now.
That's right. Now, I know that the different Native American tribes had different names for the various moons of the year. So we usually choose one or two of our favorite tribes, and we'll use that, not to play favorites or so. Worm Moon
No,
certainly doesn't have a lot of glamour to it, but it's appropriate, right? Because there's the worms
right.
coming out, and then the birds are feeding on them, and so we're going to look for that full moon coming up in a couple of days, and we're going to have a show again with Slooh and the Old Farmer's Almanac. We're going to combine that and use our giant telescopes to look at this moon and see it close up. See if we can spot any worms on the moon.
Yeah.
Marianne is laughing because, of course, that's silly joke. We're not going to see any worms on the moon, but we are going to see an unusual moon because at this time of year, the moon rises quite high in the sky. It's flooding the nights with light, and the time of the year when we get the full moon closest to the equinox, and that's the moon coming up, obviously, is also the moon that's going to be rising closest to due east, setting due west, and having a track across the sky that's not too dissimilar from the sun's track. So it's a time of equality. This is the time of year when the full moon behaves most like the sun in terms of its motion across the sky and how high it gets and things like that. So there's yet one more sign of balance and symmetry that we've got. Any others? Thoughts about the equinox that come to you? You've been observing this and writing about this for so many years, Marianne.
Well,
Uh,
there's always the folklore around the equinox too, because um, people have been balancing eggs, standing them up on the equinox, and they believe that's the only time that you can do that. And you know, of course, you can try it in May or June, and you will probably be able to balance them too. But in our offices a couple of years ago, we decided to try this, and we put 24 eggs on end, and after a full day, 17 were still standing, and this was on the day of the equinox. And then we tried it again about 3 days later, and we still got like 17 or 18 eggs standing. So you may think it's folklore, but I think you can balance eggs any day during the year.
so we can balance eggs. There's the news, folks. We can really balance eggs throughout the year, and it requires patience. It requires probably a certain personality trait to want to do that. Um, Balancing eggs, this shows the difference between the city folks who are watching this and those of us who are living up in the country. Down in New York City and the big cities, I bet they don't have time to balance 24 eggs and then come back hours later and see how many are still standing. So, we're doing this kind of thing. It's for science. It's to bring you
Yeah.
things that you won't see anyplace else. And look at that, eggs balance.
And
So, what else about the March equinox stands out? Because after you've said a couple of things, I'm going to bring some points out that are usually ignored by the media for some reason. So what else do you like about the March equinox?
well, this is the time when you can find the first spring greens growing in the fields. And the first settlers, of course, after a long winter eating salt pork and dry beans, were very anxious to get some fresh food in them. So they usually picked dandelion greens, they picked burdock, they picked nettle, they picked mustard greens, and they boiled them down and they made like a tea out of it. And they called it the spring tonic because that gave them the strength to start farming again after a long winter, and they were craving this spring tonic. And nowadays, of course, you can buy greens in the stores all winter long, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with fiddleheads, and that's the ostrich fern that starts growing right now, and it opens up, and you can pick the fiddleheads and put them in different recipes. You can just put them in olive oil with some garlic, and they're delicious. And there are also ramps that grow wild that you can pick, and that's a wild leek, and that's also very delicious to eat. And garlic scapes, the tops of garlic. So
Now it
there's lots of
sounds
greens in the
like the
nature.
way the way you're speaking about that they're delicious. It sounds like you've actually had some of these things yourself. Is
I
that
have.
true?
I have picked fiddleheads myself in New Hampshire, and I have cooked them. And this is the time, March, early April is the only time when you can get fiddleheads.
Well, there you've heard it here. So it's not just the sun. It's not just strange things in the sky. You can find these odd foods that'll give you energy and start you going for the spring. See, that's Farmer's Almanac. The old Farmer's Almanac knows about this stuff since the days of the Benjamin Franklin. I'm so proud of that publication. I mean, how many,
Yeah,
you know,
we started in 1792, and that was when George Washington was president. So it's 225 years of publishing the almanac, and we're going to celebrate 225 years next year. Actually, that's our anniversary issue.
And a very special year for that. I know because, like you, I've been working on that issue, and we can tell folks very special things coming up. Let's talk a little bit more about the equinox and what makes this one special. I'll mention a few things, and then if anything occurs to you, Marianne, just jump in there with it. All
Sure.
right, everybody knows that it marks the beginning of spring, but that's a human thing. We decided that we're going to use the very moment when the Earth's poles are neither pointing toward nor away from the sun, and we'll call that the start of spring. So it's a real item. It's as we look at this live view from Prescott observatory. This is the sun. This is the whole reason that the equinox is happening because, of course, everything is revolving around the sun at this point. But what else is happening in the sky besides that? Well, it's the only time of the year, the equinoxes, the one in March and then the one in September, in which the sun moves in a perfectly straight line across the sky. And this is the one fact that you never really see in any publication. And what I'm saying is that if you set up a camera on a tripod and take a photograph, every 5 or 10 minutes, you'll see that for the rest of the year, the sun rises. Of course, it rises in the east, goes up and to the right if you live north of the equator, as most of us do, and then follows a curved path throughout the day, a path that really looks like a smile. In other words, it's concave toward the north. It's a smiley um, curvature. Now, in the other half of the year, the cold half of the year, that is between the September equinox on September 23rd and March, the cold half of the year, again, if you photograph the sun in a time exposure, you'll see it moving in a curve across the sky, but a very different curve. Now it will be shaped like a rainbow or a frown. It'll be again rising in the east, but it'll then be moving to the right and forming a shape that's concave towards the south, a frown shape, a rainbow shape. Very different paths of the suns, but not today and tomorrow. On the day of the equinox alone, the sun's path across the sky is like a laser straight line. It's like snapping a chalk line. It travels from east to west perfectly straight. And this is one of the facts that are lesser known about it. It's also the only time that the sun rises exactly on the eastern point of the horizon, the cardinal eastern point, and sets due west. And the reason I'm saying today and tomorrow is because since for those in the United States, especially in the eastern time zone, the equinox occurs so close to midnight, we could really say that the truths about the equinox this year apply both days, today and tomorrow. So on either day, if you're listening to the show right now, look for the sunset, and that sunset point will tell you exactly where west is relative to your home. And tomorrow morning, where it rises in the east shows you precisely where due east is. It will really help you orient yourself. In fact, the word orient originally came from the idea that if you knew which way east was, you knew the direction toward the Orient. So all of these are available only on the time of the equinox. So to review, the idea that days and nights are perfectly equal everywhere, that's not true. There's more daylight than night everywhere in the world. Usually just a matter of minutes, but still it's not perfectly equal. If you go to places like the South Polar Research Station, there the inequality is absolute. The sun is up, fully up, not half up, fully up above the horizon, moving along the horizon. It does not set for a second during the day. There is no night, there's only daytime. And so there's nothing resembling equality there, nor in most of the world. So those are the truths about the equinox that we get almost equality, but not exactly so. We get a sun's path that's laser straight across the sky. We have a time of the year when the setting and the rising points of the sun are perfectly matched up with the compass cardinal points. And so there really is a equality and symmetry and a meeting between heaven and earth today. It's not just some kind of human decree that we've decided, all right, it's this date is the start of summer. Yes, we use that to start, not summer, of course, but spring. We use that occasion for that, but a lot of other things are really happening as we continue to look now at this live image of the sun, thanks to Matt Francis, the director of Prescott Observatory, bringing us this stunning live view of the nearest star to us, a star that's so large that if it were hollow, if you could unscrew the top of it like a mayonnaise jar and just pour planet Earths inside of it, a million Earths would be required to fill the sun. So this
Hey,
is
Bob.
not just some small item. And now we have Trisha Ennis. Hi,
We do.
Trisha.
I'm a poor substitute for Paul Cox, but I wanted to interject for a second into your fascinating commentary about the sun because we had actually a question from the audience, and I thought it would be very interesting to talk about the subject with you.
Great, great, great. Let's hear
Someone
it.
pointed out that during the equinox, we also experience one of my least favorite times of the year, which is daylight saving time.
Right.
And I'm wondering
Now,
if you can shed any light onto why we set the clocks forward every spring.
and it's such a relevant question, Trisha, because this year that ties in with this earliest spring of our lives, this earliest spring since 1896. It ties in with the equinox, and the equinox, in turn, well, daylight saving time ties in with the calendar system. Originally, the idea, and it's not very old because in America in particular, it's only been around since 1918, so we're only 2 years short of a century of observing that. And back then, Congress and the president did not get along terribly much better than happens these days. And so when Woodrow Wilson proposed it, it existed for, I think, 7 months, and then it was voted down again. Then it didn't happen again until FDR, Roosevelt, put it into place for World War II, and then it was abandoned again. And now we've got a mishmash where, for example, in Arizona, where those great images that we're bringing you live are happening. Nonetheless, they don't observe it. So here we have a map showing the parts of the world where daylight time is observed or where it's not observed, setting the clocks forward, and in some parts of the world it goes ahead 2 hours. So different ways of thinking of it. Trish, the first way is the most sensible, and that is we're growing in the length of the day. Obviously, we all know that in many parts of the United States and Canada, each day is 3, or in some cases even 4 minutes longer than the day before. So instead of having daylight at times when fewer people are using it, let's say 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning, why not shift it to hours where just about everybody is awake, say 6 p.m., 5:30 and 6 p.m., and therefore we don't have to use as many light bulbs. We can save energy, we can help the planet, we can be ecological by having our clocks match the actual natural times of daylight. And then in the wintertime, when that situation goes away, we change back again. So it's one of those few really nice, logical things to do. But there was another reason for it as well, and that is trying to make the day fit into the year. Boy, that's a head scratcher. You know, we spin, everybody knows that we go around once in our axis in about 24 hours. The nerds and the geeks maybe even have memorized the true figure of 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4.1 seconds. But the point is, that's not even. that doesn't evenly fit into the 365 days in a year. So you could say that roughly there's 365 and a quarter days in each year. And if only that were precise, if only the Earth really turned so that it really rotated 365 and one quarter days per year, boy, that would be simple. It would just mean every 4 years we add one extra day and we take care of that one quarter fraction. And that's the end of the matter. And the calendar matches up what daylight does and all the rest, and we'd have no problem. Unfortunately, it's not exactly a quarter. And the old Julian calendar was starting to notice it because we were getting um, our seasons really out of whack with our calendars. I mean, the Easter bunny was starting to hop around on March 11th and 12th. Yeah, that's when we were getting our um, equinoxes back then. Our March equinoxes were happening back on March 11th. Wasn't even close to the start of spring. Something had to be done to make it more precise. So good old Pope Gregory went along with suggestions that were made at the time, and that is you can make it a lot more accurate. That is accurate to within one day every 4,000 years. If you added this twist, sure, once every 4 years, you have a leap year. This is
Which is this year.
one of those years. So you just have to be a year that's divisible by 4, as this current year 2016 is, and that becomes a leap year day. And uh, add that one day to February, which is pathetically short to begin with, and so that takes care of that problem. But again, it's not exact. So to make it really fit, the century years 1600, 1700, 1800, the not 1600, I'll explain that in a moment, 1900, those years don't have leap years. In other words, you skip that. And by doing that, you're resetting the accuracy, you're tweaking it to make everything work better. Because without that, the equinoxes and the solstices just keep slipping earlier and earlier every single year. They happen in the early part of the century, they're on March 21st, and then they happen on March 20th, and then 19th and 18th, and it goes out of whack. But just by doing that leap year skip, on the century years, that fixes it, it resets it, it works very nicely, except you need one more tweak. And that is if a year is divisible by 400, then you don't skip the leap year. You do make that a leap year day. And so that's what happened in the year 2000. Remember back, the year 2000 wasn't that long ago, 16 years ago. And what happened back then was instead of doing the normal century leap year skip, we did have a leap year that year. So what? I know everybody's thinking, who cares? How long is this guy going to keep going on about this thing? What difference does it make that we have that extra day? Well, this is when we pay for that change. By not doing the leap year then, instead of resetting the solstice and the clocks back one day, it didn't happen. And instead, they continued to drift earlier and earlier and earlier. So that's why in this century, the 21st century, we're now seeing an equinox that's not happening on the 21st, which is normal, not even on the 20th. Well, barely on the 20th if you're in the Eastern time zone, but actually on the 19th if you live in the Central time zone or in the Pacific time zone. And as the years go on, for example, in the year 2020, it's going to be happening on the 19th, even in the Eastern time zone. And by the time we get later on in the century, the middle of this century, you're going to see equinoxes happening on the 19th more and more regularly. So forget about that March 21st being the first day of spring. The actual day will have moved past the 20th and even into the 19th of March. And that also applies to the solstices as well. And if that sounds all screwy and what did we do wrong? Nope, it's all part of the grand 400-year plan, because at the end of this century, when we get to the year 2100, we're back to then doing the leap year, skip again, boom, everything is reset one day. We go back to equinoxes on the 21st. Everybody's happy once again, and it's all fixed up. So it's all part of that 4,000-year plan. And there's even a way of dealing with that, because that becomes a non-leap year day, and so that even adds a tweak there too. So this is a long-winded way of saying that this strange year, where we're all experiencing the earliest spring of our lives, and that's happening coming up in just a few hours from now, all of this happened because back in 2000, we didn't do the normal thing. We did something we only do once every 400 years, and that is we allowed a leap year to happen instead of skipping it, and that's letting these days slide earlier and earlier and earlier, and it's all part of the 400-year Gregorian calendar plan. And I hope you're all taking notes on this, because that's it. So that's the explanation of how this all ties together: leap years, um, dates
Well,
of the equinox,
thank you
and
very much,
all the
Bob. That's
rest.
fascinating. I look forward to the year 2100 when that will happen again, because I guarantee you I'm going to be alive. I think you will be too. We're all just
Well,
going to
you
stay
know
alive for hundreds of years in the future, right?
well that's great. You're going to guarantee you're going to. Don't even say that. I'm
No, I'm
superstitious.
guaranteeing it. Right now, I'm guaranteeing it.
All right. So meantime,
I'm actually
everybody,
going to
we're
drop out now.
meantime.
Now that you've answered my lovely question about my least favorite time of year, because we all lose sleep, because it's springtime, and I don't know about you, Bob, but I do not have a green thumb. And we have a rare opportunity to talk to an expert on spring gardening. So I think you're going to have a conversation with Marianne again about starting your spring garden this season.
Great. So
So
let's
I'm gonna
bring
go
her
away. I'll be
back,
back in a
and
few minutes to chat with you about the Aurora borealis, because I know you've got some brand new images to show us from the Alaska trip that you had a crew go to.
absolutely. So
So
which
I'll
shall
see
we
you in
do
a few minutes,
first?
Bob.
Gardening or the Aurora? What's coming up next, Tricia?
Gardening. You and Marianne are talking about gardening next, Bob.
Okay, so Marianne, we'll bring Marianne back, and you're right. I don't have a green thumb about this. This is the time when around where I live here, this seems a little early for gardening, but it isn't, is it, Marianne? This is the time
No.
to do stuff. What should we be doing?
Well, this is the time you really should be planning your garden and get the vegetables that you want to plant, the seeds. You can start seeds indoors. I already have tomato plants growing in my attic where I have nice big windows. And another thing that you can look at is the appearance. It's called phenology. So you can look at what the nature is telling you. Like if the daffodils are in bloom, like you see here on the screen, then it's time to plant your beets and carrots. When the dandelions are blooming, then it's time to plant your potatoes. And the farmers, centuries ago, that's how they knew when to start planting their gardens. And a lot of people still do that. So there's a way to look at nature and figure out when to plant. But if you're really serious about planting and you want to design a garden, you can actually go to almanac.com, where we have a great gardening website, and we have a gardening planner that will let you draw the garden beds on the computer screen and drop the plants in to see if they will fit, and it will tell you what companion plants you can plant in the bed, and it's all on the computer. And then you just print it out, and then you can go out and plant your vegetables the way, the best way, so they can grow well. And we also have a planting calendar, so you can type in your zip code and it will tell you the best planting times for different vegetables. And that's all on almanac.com.
Wow, that was really such cool stuff. Now, what about those creatures that I know city folks are very fond of seeing. They have white tails, and they have um, they some people call them Bambis. These are animals that just have a habit of eating some of this stuff, don't they?
Yes, they do, and there's not much you can do about that. You can hang some, some people hang soap around your garden because they think that the smell of the soap will keep the deer out, or you can put a radio in your garden playing all day, all night. But the best defense is to
No,
put
no, no.
up
Any
a
particular like
fence.
rap music or hip hop
Country and
or
western.
country and western. Okay, so that's what you want for the deer.
Yeah.
Um,
But also, the best thing you can do is actually put up a fence around your garden so they don't get in there.
okay, now what about those little cute little bunny rabbits? And they
Yeah,
go under
they're
the fence, right? They go in the other direction, don't they?
yeah, they do. And there's not much you can do for it. If you have bunny rabbits around, you probably have to also put up a little fence around your garden. And then we have woodchucks too in New England that can destroy your garden, and that's a big problem.
Now, how deep
But
must a fence be to prevent bunnies from digging under it or woodchucks from
oh,
digging
at
under it?
least at least for bunnies, I think it's about a foot, but for woodchucks, it's more than that. It's like 3 feet.
3 feet. So that's serious stuff.
Yeah,
Um, and
and
what else with this? So you're saying this is the time now, the equinox. This is the time to get going. This isn't. This is not too early.
no, it's not. And old timers used to say that you should have your peas in the garden by St. Patrick's Day. So we're already past St. Patrick's Day. So get your peas in.
My goodness. But I love the fact that the Old Farmer's Almanac lets you put in your zip code, and then I guess that allows some of us who are further north, lets us be a little lazier, right? And gives us
Right,
an extra
right.
couple of weeks break or something like that.
Yeah. It figures in the late frosts and, adjusts the timing so you'll be safe planting your tender vegetables.
And the Old Farmer's Almanac, of course, is famous for weather prediction. So, what does it look like for this coming spring? Any idea what's in store?
Well, I think here in New England we're going to have some nice weather, but actually this weekend we're going to get a snowstorm. So who knows. Um, but for the rest of the country, I think it's going to be pretty nice, and the West Coast is going to get some more rain, which is helpful for the drought out there.
Good, good. Any other advice? Any other thoughts before we move to a very
Yeah,
different
I
category,
have
which is the Aurora?
weather lore that I found about the equinox, and I'll just read it to you. As the wind and weather at the equinox, so will they be for the next 3 months. And that's an old like weather lore that I found in a very old book. So people believe that whatever the weather is on the equinox, that's gonna keep going for 3 months. So, like I said, we're going to get a snowstorm tomorrow. So, I don't want 3 months of snow.
So it sounds like you're a little skeptical about that, and
Yeah,
let's hope you're right.
some of the weather lore is, it's from hundreds of years ago, but I thought that was kind of interesting that they.
It is interesting. And those of you just joining us, want to remind you that you're looking at a live view of the sun. The equinox revolves around the sun, of course. This is thanks to Slooh's partner, Prescott Observatory, great solar telescope. The director is Matt Francis. We have Marianne, the gardening editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, the longest running publication in the galaxy, not just on the planet Earth, but actually in the galaxy itself. I'm Bob Berman, who's actually associated with both the Farmer's Almanac as the astronomy editor, going on 200 years. So that's pretty far out. And to be that successful, um, I just want to remind everybody, you can see it on the wall right behind Marianne's head there at Slooh. Very proud to be part of both venerable organizations, although, boy, you can't say venerable when you're with the Old Farmers Almanac people, because nobody can be more venerable than going on 200 years. So that's pretty far out. And to be that successful, um, I just want to remind everybody, you can see it on the wall right behind Marianne's head there. That's the famous yellow, interesting. I don't know if the cover design has changed in all these centuries, but you certainly see it in your bookstores and in your supermarkets. And next year is a particularly important one, because that's the anniversary. Which is it again? The 100 and what, or the
225th.
225th anniversary. My goodness. Okay, so we're going to jump from here to something that just happened on the sun that's also tied in with the sun and the angle of the sun, and the recent expedition that we had up in Alaska, Central Alaska. We're going to show you some actual views, again, not canned, recent, just from the last few days, taken both in Iceland and in our own expedition up to the and we do that too with the Old Farmer's Almanac. Every year we bring people who wish to join us, and there it is, up to our secret places in central Alaska. Knock on wood, 20 years of doing this, we've not yet failed to see great auroras. And this is a view that just came to us from one of the members of our group. This is my own friend Bill Munch. I hope he's watching the show, and he's one of those that set up a camera on a tripod, and these are the kind of things you see. The green is real, because even though it puzzled people, scientists, for decades and decades, nobody could figure out what was causing this color. It's visible even to the unaided eye. A camera really brings it out more strikingly, but the eye has no trouble seeing the green color. And it turns out it's good old-fashioned, plain vanilla oxygen. Just oxygen in an odd state, because its electrons have been played with, thanks to the sun's power. So there's the sun all over again. And when the sun is sideways, from our perspective, or let's put it this way, Earth's poles are sideways to the sun. We have an orientation that allows the energy from the sun, mostly electrons, but also protons from the sun, to have a clearer path, clearer shot right to Earth. So since this happens on the month of the equinox, September and March, we prefer March. I'm not going to get into all the reasons why. Will bring you, by and large, more auroras, better auroras, different colors. And colors are rare to see with the unaided eye. Notice there are reds here. Truly red aurora has been described as a once-in-a-lifetime experience, mostly because to see that color, 6,400 angstroms, it's the same color as a deep ruby red laser. The human eye is extremely insensitive to dark, or I should say deep red light, because it's all the way at the edge of the spectrum. So in order to see a red aurora, the colors have to be unusually intense, whereas with a green aurora, giving you colors at wavelengths that are much easier. Generally, you'll see oxygen glowing at 5577 angstroms, and also at 5008 angstroms. Those are places where the eye is maximally sensitive to color. at low light levels, what we call our scotopic vision. So it's just by a happy coincidence that we do get those greens pretty easily if the aurora is really popping. And boy, did it pop. As I say, all of these images were just during this past week. This is not some old archived pictures we're showing you. This is what we just saw up in the during this expedition. We're crediting Bill Munch. A number of the other members of our group took it, and we're just so happy that so many members and readers from the Old Farmer's Almanac joined us, and hope you'll be among us next year when we do this. You can go online, just go on the Old Farmer's Almanac, look for the Aurora expeditions that we do, and come along with us sometime. And we do that here at Slooh ourselves. We get some great images, and then we hold a live Slooh show, because that's what Slooh really lives for. That is bringing you fantastic real-time live events of the universe, whether it's an asteroid that's narrowly missing Earth, a comet that nobody thought would be as bright as it is, but it turns out to be more spectacular than planned. Jupiter, as earlier this month, it came to its closest point to Earth that anyone has seen in several years. And we actually see it rotating and watching its red storm. Unfortunately, that giant red spot is smaller than it has been in decades. We've never seen it so small. It's about 30% littler than usual. Nonetheless, it's intense and rotates in about 6 days. So it has its own cyclonic movement to it. It's a giant hurricane-like storm. And using the giant Slooh telescopes, we actually see it. We see that rotation happening, and it's big moons discovered by Galileo in January of 1609. We watch those moons as they go around Jupiter, and Paul Cox, who is our brilliant, handles all this equipment, puts it all together, and sometimes creates these time-lapse images. At other times, the Slooh members simply take over, because as a Slooh member, you control the telescope. You tell the read from a list of menus of the things that are out, and then say, I think I'll look at Saturn tonight. And wherever our telescope points, the rest of the world and the rest of the Slooh members get to see where the telescope's looking and looking at the images. This picture, again, taken just a few nights ago up in central Alaska, showing an area of an airport, not a busy airport. The plane was sleeping for the night. Nothing is happening. So we allow people right there on the runway, so there's a clear view of the sky at the same time. So we have these wild, dark, crazy, in some place rather odd, singular places where we love to bring people where we know that there's a better chance to see it at other times. So again, revolving around the sun, because an aurora happens when there's solar activity, and you just saw from our live images from Prescott Observatory here at Slooh that detritus from the sun, explosions from the sun, the most dramatic are the CME, the coronal mass ejections, but even ordinary garden variety plain vanilla flares and prominences will produce plenty of particles, broken bits of atoms, typically hurling in our direction at 300, 400, 500 miles per second. And when they interact with our own magnetic field, well, anytime you get a charged particle going across magnetic field lines, you generate electricity. This is heavy duty. This is nothing like lightning. Far more powerful than that. Strips the electrons from the oxygen atoms that are way up there. Here's our live view of the sun, what's happening right now. And no wonder we were getting such great auroral displays. You can see in the upper left-hand part of the picture a pretty healthy flare going on, an explosion. As the sun rotates, those areas to the right of the sun are the ones that sent us the material a few days ago. because stuff from the sun follows a kind of spiral pattern, like a lawn sprinkler, the kind that, not the kind that go back and forth, but the kind that rotate. The water that heads out from the sprinkler forms a curving pattern. So, just like that, material from the sun forms a curving pattern. And so, if the explosions on the sun are on the correct part of the sun, and where we like to see them is not the center, not the exact middle of the sun, but a few days of solar rotation to the right of it, in other words, to the west of it. And in that location, that's the place where, as the material starts, it'll follow a curve, and anywhere between 2 and 4 days later, it arrives here. And if you're in the right place in the world, Iceland is not bad either, except it tends to be cloudy. And that's why we bring all our folks up to those parts of Alaska. So you've just seen it, live views of the sun, the equinox coming up half an hour after midnight. That's on Eastern Standard Time tonight, and occurring on the 19th of March, something that very few people alive have seen. And certainly, unless you're 120 years old or older, we will have the earliest start of spring, the earliest equinox of our lives coming up a few hours from now. If you were listening earlier, remember all those things that are happening on the equinox: the sun moving in a straight line across the sky, rising due east, setting due west, all of these phenomena, and they're all happening and they're all synced in with the events of Earth. This is why we had our gardening editor at the Old Farmer's Almanac telling you things to look for and to be ambitious and tie it in with actual events on Earth. So here's our live view. We're going to say goodbye to it at this point. Our Prescott Observatory view, with thanks to Matt Francis, the director there, and we just looked at views that we took from central Alaska caused by this very sun's activity, and it all ties together with Earth. A beautiful symmetry that unites every part of the planet in, we said days and nights are not exactly equal, but they're more equal than at any other time. And so it's nice. It's a kind of coming together, especially in this political atmosphere of an election year. I think many of us appreciate the natural harmonies and forces and symmetries and just plain beauty that happens when the sun and the earth form these relationships. And this one, very, very special indeed, with the earliest equinox since 1896. So, hope you enjoyed our show. I'm Bob Berman for Slooh and for the Old Farmer's Almanac. We thank Marianne Charfella for coming and giving us so much wisdom about gardening and gardening advice, and Tricia Ennis for her help as well. Um, uh, Thanks to Paul Cox, who was standing by and helping make all of this possible. We would have had him on, but so much of this revolves around technical aspects that are occurring on multiple continents at the same time to bring you these Slooh shows, that once in a while one of our planned aspects or guests, we have to drop out of that. And that's no small loss with Paul, but we're going to be seeing him again. Don't forget to join us for the worm moon. That certainly doesn't sound very appetizing unless you're a bird. Coming up in just a few days, we're going to have the full moon of March. And to have a full moon so close to the equinox produces effects of its own. So we're going to be exploring that. You can see the time. Show begins at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Pacific Time, and lots of other cool stuff too after that. Whenever anything is happening in the universe, and there's almost always something, we're there bringing it to you in real time, live. So thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure on my part. Until next time, For Slooh, I'm Bob Berman. Good night.